Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. My name is Addie and today for my first video of the year, we're going to be talking about my 2025 crochet book blanket. So for as long as I've been like a fiber crafter, I have admired people doing temperature blankets where you knit like a row for each day with color based on the temperature of that day. But I've never really been super into the idea of making my own just because I'm not like super into tracking the temperature. It's just not something that I felt like I would be motivated enough to keep up for an entire year. However, as I've started getting back into reading over the past couple of years, I have been toying with the idea of doing a year-long book blanket where I do something like a temperature blanket, but tracking the books that I read for the year. And this year, I'm gonna do it. I've seen a couple of different ways that people do book blankets. Some people do it based on genres or subgenres if they're like mostly romance readers. People do it based on the star ratings that they give books, and I've even seen people do like granny squares based on the colors of a cover of a book, and they're so gorgeous. However, that's a lot of work and I know I'm not that committed. Also, I read way too many books to be making a granny square for each book that I read in a year. The blanket would be excessively large, and I already have a feeling this blanket is going to be excessively large to make it like proportional. So we're not going to do granny squares, but what we are going to do is rows based on genre of the book that I read, and also the number of rows is going to be dictated by the length of the book. So I kind of spent all day yesterday preparing for this, and I've made myself this little key with the yarns that I'm going to be using and also the genres that they correspond to. I mostly read romance, but I read a good smattering of a bunch of other different genres, so that's what I decided to go with instead of just tracking like subgenres or anything like that. So I've got a base sort of dividing color. I want to have a little line of white in between each book that I read to break them up. Romance, YA, fantasy slash sci-fi, horror slash thriller slash mystery, graphic novels, poetry, historical fiction, contemporary fiction, and nonfiction. And then I also have a cheat sheet here based on kind of how I am generally gonna do the number of rows based on how long a book is. In general, I think if a book is below 200 pages, I'm going to just give it one row. If it's between like 200 and 400 pages, I'll give it 2 rows. Between like 400 and 600, I'll give it 3 rows. Between 600 and 800, 4 rows. And then if it's 800 plus, it'll be 5 rows. I think I only read one book that was over 800 pages last year. That was Prior of the Orange Tree. And I want to try to read A Day of Fallen Night this year, so I'll probably hopefully have at least one book where we get to 5 rows. But for the most part, books that I read are generally going to be around like the 350, 400 page range for like standard length romance novels and contemporary fiction. So for the most part, I'm going to be doing 2 rows. The inspiration for how my blanket is actually going to look like came from a crocheter on Instagram called LTK Cuties. I haven't seen her update on this blanket since like early of this past year, but looking at the initial pictures of it, I really liked how it looked with the moss stitch. And so that's where I kind of decided to lean towards when I was looking at patterns to follow. And then the base pattern that I'm going to be following is called the Speckled Moss Stitch Baby Blanket by Daisy Farm Crafts. This is basically just a standard baby blanket pattern that uses single stripes of moss stitch. So looking at it, I knew that I was going to like kind of how it would eventually look like. But in the end, basically all I'm really going to be using this for is like the first couple of rows and the last couple of rows and then the border. And the rest of it is basically totally freehand. I'm going to be chaining more stitches than what is in this pattern because I read too many books for it to just be a baby blanket. Like if I just did a baby blanket, it would be super disproportionate. Like it would be really, really thin compared to how long it is. So I think in the end, I used a blanket sizing calculator from Easy Crochet, and I chose like, okay, if I read approximately 150 books in this next year, which I think is a decent estimate, then I would need probably about 300 rows. And to make that proportionate with 300 rows, I'm gonna end up with like a full queen size blanket. So it's gonna be a big ass blanket. But I think it'll be fun. I read 173 books in 2024 and 247 in 2023. So 2023 was a big year for me. I got more of a life in 2024, which is why I read quite a smaller number of books. And I think that my life is going to continue to be lifey. So I think probably around 170, maybe even a little bit less, because I want to read some more like bigger books. I want to get more into fantasy. So I think 150 is like a safe estimate. It might be a little bit longer. So I think in the end, we're going to have to be pretty wide for it to be proportionate with how I want it to look. And then here's all of the yarn that I got for this project. Let me take you through it. So for my base like divider color, I'm going to be using soft white in Red Heart Super Saver. I'm not like the type of person where I need to have the fanciest yarn, and also this yarn was on sale for $2.50 at Joann's at the end of the year, so this is what I'm going for. Goal to keep it like under $75 total throughout the year on yarn. I think I maybe bought enough. We'll see. I probably am going to have to buy a couple more skeins depending on how things go. But yeah, so this is going to be my base color, is this lovely little white. Then for romance, I'm going to use baby pink, also in the Red Heart Super Saver. Every color that I'm using is Red Heart Super Saver except for one. I'll tell you which one that is in a minute. Then for YA books, I'm going to use the Pretty in Pink color. For fantasy / sci-fi, I'm going to use this gold color, which I love. And then this is Big Twist Value yarn in Rust. I had some of this left over from a Christmas project, so I figured I would throw it in there. I'm going to use this one for horror / thriller / mystery, which I really don't read a ton of, so I think one skein should be enough, but if I need another one, I know what color it is and I can grab it. And then for graphic novels, I'm going to use this pale plum color, also in the Red Heart Super Saver. Poetry will be medium purple in Red Heart Super Saver. Historical fiction is going to be light blue in Red Heart Super Saver. Contemporary fiction is going to be turquoise in Red Heart Super Saver. And then nonfiction is going to be real teal in Red Heart Super Saver. And so if you look at my little book blanket key, I've got each color of yarn threaded through a heart-shaped hole punch because I thought that was just cute. And then I have each different genre that it corresponds to on this side. I've also got a cheat sheet for how many rows that I want to do for different numbers of pages of the books that I read. And then on the opposite side, I have note of the color and the brand of the yarn so that if I need to buy more, I don't forget what it is. And I just did this in Google Docs, printed it out, and then laminated it and hole punched. It was pretty easy to do. I did do it twice because the first time I did it, it wasn't actually like properly reversible with the hole punch. So a little bit of trial and error, but in the end, it really wasn't that hard. And I think it looks pretty good. So this is all of the yarn that I'm going to use for different colors in my reading blanket. As for the books that I'm currently reading, these are ones that I started in 2024, but I'm going to finish in 2025. In physical form, I'm currently tandem reading Harrow the Ninth, which is the second book in the Locked Tomb series, and the audiobooks are just so good that you kind of have to listen to the audiobook even if you're reading in physical form. So that's what I'm doing with this one. So that's going to be fantasy / sci-fi, so it'll be the gold color. And then I'm also working my way through this little essay anthology called Manifesto, which features the Communist Manifesto, an essay by Rosa Luxemburg, and then another essay by Che Guevara. So this is kind of like a good little socialist reader that I'm working my way through. I'm currently reading the Rosa Luxemburg essay, which is pretty long, but I think it's good. It's a good argument on like why you need a revolution versus just relying on reform. And so that will then be this deep teal color. And then the audiobook that I'm currently reading is The Bear and the Nightingale, which is another fantasy, so it'll also be this gold. So my first colors in the blanket are going to be this gold and teal most likely, but then the biggest bulk of the blanket is honestly going to be pink. I read mostly romance, but I'm really excited with how these two are going to look next to each other. I think they look so good. All right, now I'm going to make myself a cup of tea and get started on my base rows, which are going to be in that white, so that I am ready to go when I finish my first book of the year. Okay, so it turns out I was lying because the second I put the kettle on, a maintenance person came to fix my stove. So I now have a working stove, but I didn't film myself starting the blanket, but I did start the blanket. So here it is in all her glory. I started by chaining 300 stitches in my base white color, and then I did 2 rows of moss stitch, and this is going to be the sort of end of the row. And then when I finish my first book of the year, I will do whatever color it is that that book genre refers to. I'm thinking that I will probably do sort of monthly crochet and reading videos where each time that I finish a book, I'll film myself crocheting the rows for that book and talking about it and my thoughts on it, and then edit them all together at the end of each month. So definitely go ahead and subscribe and keep an eye out for the one for January and the rest of the months of the year. Let me know if you are planning on doing anything like this for 2025, if you crochet, if you have any books that you're looking forward to. Let's just have a little conversation about like what we're looking forward to for the next year. And until then, happy crocheting, happy reading, happy new year.